Hello and welcome to the omnibus edition of the making of this rug quilt. I've edited all 4 episodes together for you in one place so that you can save it for future reference. I'll start with the episodes for the heart appliques and also the leaf appliques because I use 2 different methods to do those. And after that there's some information on how to construct the blocks, how to join them, and also how to get this wonderful bit of texture by snipping the seam allowances. So you can find all the information you need from start to finish, and I hope it'll inspire you to have a go. I can't tell you how nice these rug quilts are. They have a lovely drape to them, and the texture that you get is just delicious. So let's get to it. Enjoy. Hello everyone and welcome back. Today I want to talk about applique and show you how to sew these lovely heart shapes, and I'll be using some iron-on interfacing for these, and I just love the sort of almost pillow-like effect that you get using the interfacing, and yeah, all the lovely quilty texture by sewing around them. Okay, let's get going. Start by choosing your shape, and I think heart shapes are quite a good shape to learn. Sort of, you have different curves here to learn the different ways of managing those. To get a nice heart shape, if you do want it symmetrical, I mean you may not want to, but if you do, you can fold over a piece of paper and either side just draw half a heart, cut it out and then fold it out, and that would give you a nice shape. And I've transferred it then onto sort of a cardstock, and I'll be using that to draw on the interfacing. And this is what I'm using. It's the Vliesline F220, and you can see on the edge here it does actually have the instructions on it, which is really quite handy. So you can wash it up to 95 degrees, and the ironing time to fuse this with the fabric is 8 seconds. And if you've not used interfacing before, they come in different weights, and this is quite a lightweight, but you can get medium weight or even heavy weight if you were making, for example, fabric storage baskets and you wanted a lot more structure. I don't know if this shows up in the camera, but with interfacing you always have one really smooth side and another side that is gritty, and you can really feel it's rough, and that is due to the little glue dots that are on that side. And this is also, I don't know if it shows up, shinier. And to transfer your shape, you want the smooth side facing up, and I'm leaving sort of a good finger width around. I'm using a pencil, but you can use a water-soluble marker or maybe a Pilot friction pen which erases with heat. So totally up to you what you have. And then just roughly cut out this shape, and then you want to pin this to the fabric that you are using. And as this is see-through, you can sort of choose what you want to have included in the, this would be your stitch line, so what is inside. And again, you want a little bit of space to make it easier for yourself, and grab a couple of pins. and then just cut again, cut around sort of loosely. And all these little edges that will get cut off later on, I will keep them and use them for a different project, so nothing will go to waste. Before you take this to the sewing machine, just double check the smooth side is the one that you drew the mark on, which is now facing up, and the glue side, the rough side, is facing the right side of the fabric. I'm shortening my stitch length to 2 millimeters because we're going around some really tight corners and it will make it a bit easier. I usually start on either that one or that one of the straight edges, and this is just a normal straight stitch, and I put my needle down to make sure I'm going to hit that line. Okay. And don't forget to back stitch, just a couple of stitches. And it is really worth taking your time over the bends, over the round sides here, because this will determine how nice the shape is of the heart that you are appliquing. So to get round, as the curve gets steeper, I keep lifting here the presser foot every few stitches and just move the fabric around bit by bit. And again, the shorter stitch length really helps with this. Now I happen to hit the exact tip of the heart, which is okay. But if you're slightly away from it, then you can do a straight stitch this way, and that will give you a really nice V-shape point when you're turning later on. But I don't want to go over the middle, so I'm just going to stick with this. Oh, and it's hard to see through the phone and the camera. It's right in my line of sight. So again, you can do a straight, just one stitch, and then finish off, and again back stitch, just a couple of stitches, and then you're done. If you have zigzags, you can use these, or just use regular fabric scissors, and you want to go sort of maybe 1/8 of an inch away from the stitch line. And the next step is you want to trim the tip and get as close to the stitch line as you can without going through it. And then I also take off a little bit either side at an angle, and that will give you a really nice crisp point. And then you want to snip all around, and as you get to the curves, snip a little bit more often. And again, get up to the stitch line without going through it. And then you want one cut right in the middle. And in order to turn this, separate the layers and do a little slit into the interfacing, and then cut an opening, and be really careful, this tears super easily. It will do a little bit, but the less the better. And now you have the glue side, the rough side on the outside here, and this is how you will applique. I usually just use something fairly rounded, and today I've got my hands on a crochet hook just to push out the last little bits. And I am pushing, I don't know if you can see this, inside the actual fabric, and I'm not pushing the interfacing because you would probably go through it. So make sure that you are inside the seam line here where the, God, I hope you can see this, where the actual fabric is. And just gently just tease out the curves. And then you can finger press as well. Again, be really careful with the tip because it's really easy to push this through by mistake. And this is where you really benefit from taking your time earlier of getting those nice curves. And then I'm sort of rolling under the interfacing a little bit because you don't really want that to show. This is ready for ironing now. Because I'm using these square quilt blocks for my rag quilt, I want to find the center of the piece, and I'm just ironing a light crease into it both ways, and then it's much easier to place the applique shape on here. Right. The lines now is sort of, they're functioning as a grid, and they're helping me to position, and I want to have the tip and the V aligned and the line about halfway. Okay, when you're happy with it, take your hot iron, and I've got the steam off. Make sure you're sort of squeezing it into all directions, and then leave it 5, 6, 7, 8, for about 8 seconds. And that's your applique done. There's lots of choices at this stage, and I just thought I'd show you a few. So you can either leave the applique shape as it is, and then I hand stitched around it, and well, that was my first attempt. Used a decorative stitch on my machine just to do some edging, and this one here I used a zigzag, and I still have to do the border, or a blanket stitch by machine followed by some hand stitching. You could of course do the blanket stitch by hand as well, which would also look really lovely. And you can see all the different looks that you get on the back, and I love especially the quilty texture that you will get from hand quilting. So for this rag quilt, I decided to do a mixture so that there is some variety, and I used a zigzag border on that one. I've got a wave, which is quite pretty, another decorative stitch on the machine. And yeah, I have used the leaves a couple of times because I thought it was quite appropriate for the William Morris fabric collection by Free Spirit Fabrics, because botanicals were such an inspiration for his various designs. I thought I'd reintroduce that. So for this one I will do the machine blanket stitch and just show you how to do that. I've got my backing and my piece of wadding. Now the beauty of rag quilts is that they are so beginner friendly and very forgiving. So you add, later on you add all the squares together with the seam facing upwards, and then you snip, and with sort of a few washes they start to fray really nicely, and it looks really, really good. So my machine has a few decorative stitches as well as functional ones, and I'm going to use, where is it, number 27 here, which is the buttonhole stitch. Because you're going sort of in and out, you want a foot with an opening so that the needle doesn't hit the metal as it moves in and out, and the same goes for zigzag. So a regular zigzag foot is going to work as well. So I've got my stitch width set to 4 and the length to 2.5. And I'm very slowly guiding with my left hand and a little bit here with the right hand, sort of guiding the piece around the corner. Very, very slightly until we hit the round part. Now, this is what I consider the end of the stitch, so that the first part is always the straight stitch coming towards you. And when you can see that the straight stitch would actually move away from your applique shape, then it's time to do a bigger shift and lift the presser foot so that you are parallel again. And again, so that's the end of the stitch, because I know the next stitch will be coming towards me as a straight stitch. And as long as you have lined up the straight stitch with the edge of your applique shape, everything else will fall into place. So you never need to worry really about the side stitch, because the machine will do all that. Just concentrate on the stitching parallel to the edge. And as we're getting to this curve here, I'm literally adjusting the fabric with every stitch to get that really nice round shape. And as you're getting to the V tip, I try and zoom in a little bit for you. Anticipate how many more stitches you can fit in before you need to turn. So there's going to be one more. So I don't have enough space left now for another forward stitch. So what I'm going to do is pivot, not all the way, but just enough. So I'm not going into the side of it, if that makes sense. And again, not all the way to here, because I'd be too far away from the edge. So just bridging the gap a little bit. And now is the time to line up again with a straight stitch. So I'm coming up to the tip of the heart, and again I'm thinking I can fit at least, no, two, yeah, not just one, and another one. Here we go. And that's what I consider the end of the stitch. And then I'm just turning it a little bit so that I'm just hopping over the very tip. And again, and now we're parallel, almost parallel again. Yeah. So this is the finished applique. And I'll probably add a frame, a hand stitch frame to it. Hello and welcome back. In my last video I showed you the process of how to applique these heart shapes using iron-on interfacing, and that is definitely my preferred go-to method for larger shapes like this. But when I tried to use this method to applique these leaves, the lightweight interfacing kept ripping as I was trying to turn these corners. So I thought I'd try a different product. And I used this Bondaweb Fleezafix by Fleeceline, which is great for using on more intricate shapes, smaller shapes, or sort of specific shapes that have a lot of points, for example stars, and the difference is that it looks like this. So there is actually a layer that eventually you would peel off before ironing on. So that's what I'll be showing you today. So this Bondaweb has a smooth side and a really gritty side. And the gritty side is the side with the glue dots. And you want to draw your shape onto the smooth side. And if you have a shape that's not quite symmetrical, then you can add a little letter on there for left, for example, and then flip it over, and then you can mark that on here with the letter right so that you know which way to face the fabrics later on when you come to iron them on. And because we're literally cutting on the pencil mark, you can draw them as close together as you can to save on material. And I like to do these in a batch so that I can draw quite a few, cut them out, and then have them all ready for ironing on. I'm going to put a little L in there so I know that this would be facing the left. And then a R in here. And then you literally you just cut them out. Find the rough side, which is the one with the glue dots, and the glue dots will go onto the wrong side of the fabric. And because we're cutting this to the edge, again, you can place them really close so that you're not wasting much fabric. And you want to press between 5 and 10 seconds. I usually do 10, to be honest, on this quilting cotton. And there's no steam. This is what it looks like. When you've ironed the shapes on, grab your fabric scissors and cut on the line right on the edge. An easy way to find the middle is to put a couple of creases, just lightly ironed, and that'll give you a center point and also lines. You'll also need a tea towel, and I'm going to wet this, just that it's damp and not dripping. So now you've decided where you're going to place your applique shapes, the next step is to peel off the backing paper. If you're finding it a bit fiddly to find the corner, just take a pin, score it, and then that would help you just to take the back off this way. And really carefully, because you don't want to move the applique shapes, just lay it across. And place the iron over it another 10 seconds. And then check, yeah. And you can just go over again just to take some of the moisture out of your fabric. And there's your applique shapes. I will do a mixture of top stitching to turn the squares into quilt blocks. So here I've done a buttonhole stitch, which I cover in the other video. This is what it looks like if you zigzag quilt. And you can just do a nice mixture, because it would give you different textures. I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about what a rag quilt is and how you assemble the blocks before I will start sewing them together in the next video. Traditionally, you would make your quilt top and add the wadding and the backing on the back, so you would have those 3 elements that you would add together before you do the quilting. But with this rag quilting, you actually quilt each of these squares individually before you sew them together, and that makes this type of quilting really beginner friendly. It's a really interesting way to quilt, and I actually love all the texture that you have in this quilt that you get from snipping the seam. Flannel fabrics are quite popular for rag quilts, but I just used normal quilting cottons, and I wasn't quite sure to begin with, you know, whether I would get the same lovely bit of fraying, because I haven't seen much online with quilting cottons. But as you can see, the fraying isn't an issue. It looks really nice, and it's been washed I think 2 or 3 times since I finished it. And the reverse is a totally different colour scheme, because I thought it's quite nice to have a spring side sort of with pastel shades, and have a darker side with a fray, which is a bit more wintry. This is the reverse of the quilt, and you can see here that I quilted each individual block just with an X through the middle to secure the wadding inside. When you choose your fabrics, just bear in mind that whatever is on the back of the quilt will come through a little bit on the, on the side with a fray, because it shows through as soon as you start snipping. So, just bear that in mind. I've just taken one of the squares apart that I had prepped, just to show you how it goes together. Now, you can make these any size really. Just have a think what the requirements are for the quilting. This wadding can be quilted as far apart as 8 inches, which I think is pretty much the widest I've personally come across. Other types of wadding, they may need to be quilted maybe 4 or 5 inches apart. So depending on that, you need to make sure that you design the quilting accordingly, really. My backing is the same size as the top, and I've decided to do that in 9 inches square. And because of the snipping of the seams, you actually need to have a much larger seam allowance than you would normally have. And I am going for a 3/4 of an inch seam allowance. That means that the squares of wadding that I've cut are 7.5 inch square. And all you do really is you have the nice side, the right side facing down, and then you add your layer of wadding, and you put the top on here, and you just add a few pins. And the next step after I've pinned this is to add some top stitching around the applique. And I've done this lovely blanket stitch here with a machine, and I've actually added a decorative border, but you can also add some hand stitching around the applique as well as a border. And adding this border really keeps the wadding in place. I want to add a really important word about the positioning of the backing fabrics. I've made my life really easy by choosing lots of sort of neutral tones from the Moda Grunge range, which means that it doesn't really matter, which square goes where. So if you have backing fabric that has lots of different patterns and you want them to be arranged in a certain order, either maybe because they're directional or you might want to spread around certain designs, lay them out row by row, so the whole quilt back, how you want them to be. And then you would add what goes on top. But obviously, we don't want the right side facing up. What we want is the wrong side to go on the back of the wadding. But because you don't want to just turn each individual square around, because that would put them in the wrong position, what you actually want to do, in order for the flower to remain second from the left, and I know this is counterintuitive, but trust me, you want to turn them over and also switch them round. Just like as if you were flipping the quilt over. Because there's an odd number, the middle one actually stays in the same position, you just put the right side facing down. So when you now add your quilt top and pretend all these individual squares have been quilted and joined, when you flip the quilt over, so imagine these are all joined, the flower is again in the position second from the left. Hello and welcome back to part 2 of the making of this rag quilt. With a little help from my local sewing group, I've arranged all 70 quilt blocks and stacked them into piles, ready to take to my sewing machine. I also added numbered slips of paper, and this will make it much easier to keep track of the different rows and to keep the blocks in the right order. In the end, I chose to go with 10 rows of 7 quilt blocks each. And I keep the pile for row 10 at the bottom and add the rest of the stacks on top. Now it's time to actually join the individual quilt blocks together, and I'm going to take off the first and second block from the top, and as this is a rag quilt, all the seams will be pointing upwards. So you have the top facing up and also facing down, so that you have your back of the quilt touching. I want to add the stitch line just next to the wadding, so I don't want to catch that with the machine. So I want to be stitching sort of as close to it as possible, because when you snip all the edges, you don't want to have wadding sticking out, because that would make such a mess when it's snipped, and yeah, you don't want to have to deal with that. And we have secured it in place with the borders, so it's not going to be shifting. There might be slight variances between each quilt block, but generally I think I will go with 1/2 inch seam allowance, and my needle is positioned in the middle. And just to make it a little bit easier, I'm going to use some washi tape, and if you don't have any, you can use painter's tape, for example, anything that makes it easy to take this off the machine and remove it afterwards. So I'm going to use the marking on my plate here for half an inch, and that will be a guide. If you don't have a walking foot, you can use your normal presser foot. The walking foot does make it a little bit easier because it grips the fabric better. With a normal walking foot, you might find that the foot might want to slide off this little step here. It's hard to describe, but you might actually have to really sort of feed the fabric in against sliding off. I hope that makes sense. But again, don't worry about having perfectly straight lines. You will not see any little sort of swerving. It is not going to be a problem, so don't worry too much about that. And I'm going to take the next 2, and I've already pinned them. So this is quilt block number 3 and quilt block number 4 of the first row. And by having the thread intact, I know exactly in which order they were sewn. I've now got quilt block number 5 and 6, and carry on without cutting the thread. So you can see that the fabric just wants to go that way, and there's a little gap that's already appeared, but again, I can only stress, don't worry about that. You can oversteer a little bit and sort of feed it back. This was quilt block number 1 and quilt block number 2, and then I'm going to snip the seam here, and I know that this was quilt block number 3, and I now need to join these two together. And the last pair is still attached here, so again we're preserving the order in which to sew things together. And what I love about this stage is it's absolute magic how quickly things are coming together now. And you can see the quilt coming to life. So I'm going to snip the last connection here. So we have 6 blocks joined now, and we can then add number 7 as the last one of that row. And in just a few minutes, the first row is actually complete. So just another 9 to go. I'm going to take the piece of paper and pin it to the block 1 of the first row. And again, that'll just keep things organised and easy for joining the rows together later on. These are row 1 and 2, and all 7 blocks are joined, and I just thought I'd show you how to join the rows. I've got a bunch of clips here, and I start in the middle and work my way outwards, and if there's any sort of excess on one side, you can sort of distribute it along the way. I match up the seam lines and then I nest the seams. So one side is going this way and the other is going that way. And I do the same on here. And if you find that one side has a little bit more length here than the other, give it a little stretch and find the middle, and then you can ease in any excess, and it just won't show in the end, so you don't have to worry too much about that. And you just work your way to the end and start sewing. I've made really good progress today, and I'm just adding row number 7 to the other 6, and the quilt is getting heavier, and what is really important at this stage is that you support the weight really well, because what you don't want to happen, sorry about the shadows, it's actually night time by now, what you don't want to happen is that the weight of the quilt drags and pulls on your stitches, because that will make it really hard to keep a straight seam line here. I'm just adding row 8 to the quilt, and by now there's been quite a bit of handling and there is bound to be quite a lot of fray. I just wanted to give you a little tip. When you clip the rows together, just pull all the frayed edges out so that there's none caught on the back of the quilt as you're adding the clips, because that would give you a really clean seam on the back, if that makes sense. If there's any threads poking through, you'll have to, you know, just go along and snip them off, but you might as well save yourself the work later. I've joined all 10 rows together now, and we'll add another line of stitching around the whole of the outside to secure all the edges. I'm using the same 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then I'm going to sew around a second time and move the needle position to the left so that I end up with 2 lines of stitching quite close together, and that will secure everything nicely. Whenever I cross one of those seams, I add a few back stitches just for some extra support. Are you ready for the next stage? This will be one epic session of snipping. What you want to do now is snip literally as close to the seam as you can safely get, and make a snip sort of every centimetre or centimetre and a half every single seam, and I'm going around the outside and do the same. If you haven't got any specific snips, you can just use some scissors, fabric scissors with a really sharp point, and they'll do the trick just the same. This is also a really good opportunity to pull out whatever threads you can so they don't land in your washing machine. If you have it straight, so you're not running the risk of cutting into anything underneath, and then you can literally use your fingers as a guide of where you want the snips to end. And that way I find it is quite easy to get close to the seam without running the risk of going through it. So every sort of centimetre or so and then I'm moving on to the next one. These are quite a few layers. If you have a few layers to get through, you can, if your snips aren't as sharp, just do them bit by bit. I've made really good progress the last couple of evenings with the snipping, and I've done 8 out of 10 rows, so not much more to go, and you can see the result of what it looks like. And once you've washed it once or twice, they become really nice and soft, these edges, and if I promise you it will get less of a sort of little thread bits coming out. It is worth the extra hoovering for a while. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial and we'll have a go at making a rat quilt. Feel free to use up scraps to make it really colourful, or just plain without the applique on top, or you can add different quilting, different type, or you can hand stitch it. There are so many different possibilities to make this your own and unique, and I'm sure you'll enjoy the process. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again soon for another project. Take care, bye bye.